Winter of 1965 still clings to my memory like damp steel, the kind that seeps through your skin and settles into your bones. Because that was the season I first rode the USS Grey Vale, SSN 612, a newly minted Permit-class nuke boat that already felt decades old the moment you stepped into narrow passageways. I was a fresh sonar tech, third class, barely past the schoolhouse, carrying more nerves than experience, assigned to a mission that was supposed to be routine, a quiet deep dive evaluation run along the mid-Atlantic ridge. No enemies, no geopolitical chess moves, just systems checks and acoustic trials, or so the official brief claimed. We cast off from the pier in the kind of pre-dawn darkness that makes everything feel like a secret. No ceremony, no brass waving farewell, just hushed commands, lines thrown, hull brushing against the tugs, and the river swallowing us as we slid toward open water. The boat smelled like a mixture of old paint, trapped sweat, and machinery heat, familiar scents that became your entire world once you sealed the hatches. Commander Walter Briggs, our captain, carried himself like a man permanently waiting for bad news. Word was he'd served during the Thresher era, and you could see that ghost clinging to him every time he passed the memorial plaque mounted near control. The exec, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, was quieter, more analytical, the kind of officer who asked you a question that sounded simple until you realized it wasn't. Chief Ortega, my division head, had the grizzled calm of someone who had learned sonar back when boats still burned diesel and men snowplow checking gauges. He could lean over the console without wearing a headset and still know if a bearing was wrong by a fraction of a degree. We also had a civilian on board, Dr. Evelyn Hart from Woods Hole, a marine acoustics specialist whose neatly pinned hair and crisp notebooks looked completely out of place mixed to our unshaven faces and oil-smudged hands. Her obsession was the new experimental sonar array installed in our bow dome. More elements, more fidelity, more range. The brass wanted proof it could listen deeper and cleaner than anything in the fleet. And then there was the classified add-on. Reports of strange low-frequency noise detected far out in the Atlantic. Sounds that didn't match whales, storms, chipping lanes, or anything in the catalog. Our real task was to drift along the ridge and capture whatever was making that sound. Normal underway life settled in fast. Watches, drills, meals that tasted mostly of metal trays, and that stale recycled air that dried your throat no matter how much water you drank. The reactor boys stayed aft, swimming in coolant fumes, while the mess decks filled with the usual blend of card games, dark jokes, and exhausted bodies passing each other in tight corridors. In sonar, the compartment was always dim, bathed in the soft green glow of screens, consoles humming, paper flowing from recorders like endless ribbons of evidence no one would ever read twice. Hart squeezed into a small corner with her equipment patched into ours, listening through her own filters, looking at noise floors the way poets look at metaphors. First couple of days, the Atlantic was quiet. Just distant merchants, a few migrating whales, the rolling static of storms hundreds of miles away. I logged everything because Ortega would bite my head off if I didn't. Then during a late-night watch, as we approached the ridge, the ocean's voice shifted. A faint pulse, barely a whisper, rose from below us. Not random, not mechanical, not geological, a rhythm. I adjusted the gain, narrowed the filters, trying to convince myself it was turbulence bouncing off rock formations. But the beat persisted. Soft thump, pause, soft thump again, coming from beneath our keel as if echoing from the dark spine of the earth. Ortega slid beside me, headset half off, listening with that stone-faced concentration he rarely broke. Range is garbage, he muttered, but it's there. Not weather, not surface traffic. Art appeared almost instantly, drawn by instinct more than sound. She listened, eyes marring with that mix of curiosity and dread scientists try to hide when they know they're about to say something unsettling. She suggested reflections or long-range noise folding under the ridge, but the uncertainty in her voice said otherwise. When Brakes made his walkthrough, we briefed him. He didn't flinch, just ordered us to log it and record a reel, reminding everyone we were here for noise, not trouble. But something about the way he stared at the trace told me he didn't like it. For hours afterward, I sat with the headset glued to my skull, listening to that faint heartbeat-like echo repeating from the deep. A soft reminder that the Atlantic is older than we are, deeper than we can imagine, and full of places where sunlight never existed. I didn't know it then, but that tiny pulse was the first knock on the door, an introduction from something waiting far below the ridge, something none of us were prepared to meet. For a day or so after that first anomaly, life aboard settled back into its usual pattern of metal, sweat, and routine. The kind of artificial normal you cling to on a submarine, because the alternative is thinking too much about the thousands of feet of cold black water pressing in from every side. But that fragile steadiness didn't last. The change came quietly at first, just sound again, always sound. We'd been creeping along the ridgeline, depth sliding slowly downward as we mapped the terrain, the hull groaning now and then as steel adapted to pressure. I was on mid-watch and sonar, half running on stale coffee and muscle memory, when that strange echo returned. No longer a faint pulse but a deliberate rhythm. 2 low, heavy thumps, a pause, then 2 more. The beat followed us, shifting bearing as we altered course, always staying just beneath our keel as if pacing our movements. Double ping, Ortega murmured, leaning over me. He cycled through filters, killed background noise, adjusted gain, and the pattern remained stubbornly alive underneath it all. When Hayes arrived from control, shoulders tight with exhaustion, we played it for him. Could be bottom reflections, you said, though the lack of conviction in his voice was loud enough to hear without headphones. Ortega shook his head. Reflections don't track the boat. That ended the debate. Captain Briggs was summoned, followed shortly by Dr. Hart, both of them wearing expressions carved out of fatigue and unease. Briggs listened, jaw set, and decided on a carefully measured response. 1 active sonar pulse, low-power narrow band, designed to map the ridge without broadcasting our presence more than necessary. Hart wasn't thrilled. No scientist likes contaminating data with a massive sound spike, but she complied, outlining the limits and reminding Briggs the ridge geometry might cause unpredictable returns. When the ship quieted for transmission, it felt as though every man aboard was holding his breath. Silence on a submarine is a living thing. It grows, expands, fills the air, until the only sound left is your pulse against your skull. On your mark, Ortega whispered. Send it, Briggs replied. The ping rolled through the hull and a heavy vibration you could feel in your teeth, the kind that made the overhead screws rattle and dust drift from unseen corners. The first reflection came back clean, ridge outline crisp, predictable. But then, late on the return cycle, 2 deep pulses surged in from far below us, slow and resonant, nothing like the ridge or our own transmission pattern. Hart's eyes widened. That isn't rock, she said, tracing the waveform with her fingertip. Not a cavity, not a void. That shape matches soft tissue displacement, something with mass, something moving. Hayes asked if it could be a whale, though even he sounded doubtful. Hart shook her head. Depth's wrong, frequency's wrong, scale is wrong. Whatever that is, it's large. Word spread fast, because nothing stays secret long in the confines of a pressure hull where every sound travels and every face reveals more than intended. By the next meal, the crew called it the echo with a heartbeat, whispering theories ranging from seismic burps to deep-sea giants that had slipped through the cracks of evolution. Briggs denied every rumor with measured calm, but he couldn't stop the shift in atmosphere, the subtle tightening of shoulders, the sudden quiet when someone mentioned the ridge. We pressed forward toward a canyon on the charts, a narrow trench that dips sharply before rising into a jagged plateau. As we crossed above it, a hull groaned in long, uneasy notes that made even the veteran sailors glance upward, as if expecting the ocean to push straight through the steel. Not long after, Dr. Hart cornered Ortega with a stack of printouts, showing him frequency peaks that aligned with cartilage-bearing marine predators, though scaled far beyond known species. Goblin sharks use electroreception, she murmured. Deep dwellers with long snouts, cartilage structures tuned for sensing fields. This profile is similar but amplified. Ortega didn't comment, but the way he rubbed his jaw said more than words. Meanwhile, the boat itself began acting strange. Electrical flickers danced across panels. A brief power dip rolled through the reactor systems before stabilizing. Stevens, the reactor officer, reported minor fluctuations that shouldn't have existed, like something brushing against the magnetic field itself. Briggs logged every incident, but made no drastic changes, unwilling to spook the crew or deviate from orders without hard proof. I went back on watch a few hours later, headset pressed tight, trying to tell myself the boat's hum was normal. Then I heard it, tiny, rapid clicks buried under ambient noise, aligned perfectly with the rhythm of our coolant pumps. "Chief, I've got something riding the pump frequency," I said. Ortega listened, face hardening. He shut down one processing channel to isolate the sound. The clicks continued even after the machinery stopped, repeating for several seconds before vanishing entirely. When he brought the channel back online, the ocean returned to its usual low moans and murmurs. "You heard it," I whispered. "Yeah," he said, writing a small note on the log sheet. Nothing dramatic, no theatrics. Just quiet acknowledgement that something outside the hull was listening, maybe even mimicking. After that, the jokes died out completely. Even the dark humor turned hollow. Men walked quicker in the passageways. Some turned their heads at phantom noises. And every time the hull creaked, every time a pipe shuddered, every man on board wondered if that pulse beneath us was drawing closer. Somewhere in that rising tension, Briggs authorized deployment of the experimental hydrophone buoy, Hart's other prototype, meant to dangle below the bow on a cable to map sound free from hull interference. It should have been routine. But nothing was routine anymore, and when we pushed that buoy into the deep, whatever waited down there finally touched us back. The buoy deployment should have been just another quiet experiment, the kind of low-risk test that gives scientists data and sailors a distraction. But the moment we pushed that capsule through the forward tube and let it sink below the bow, the entire mission crossed an invisible line we could never walk back from. I watched the indicator lights as the small hydrophone body slid into the black, the cable unwinding with a soft mechanical purr, giving us a clean acoustic angle away from our own hull noise. In sonar, Ortega and Hart set up a dedicated channel, their faces lit by the pale glow of screens as the buoy began feeding raw sound straight through the cable. For a few moments, everything felt reassuringly normal. "Clean so far," Ortega muttered, tapping his pencil rhythmically on a console. The buoy picked up ridge echoes, minor scatterers, small fish, drifting debris, nothing unusual, nothing that hinted at the unease that had been building around us like static electricity in a dark room. I let myself breathe a little easier, foolishly convincing myself that whatever had been pacing us from below had lost interest. But the ocean has a habit of revealing its teeth the moment you relax. Without warning, the entire submarine jolted in a violent, bone-deep shudder that felt nothing like a depth creak or a course correction. Consoles rattled, a coffee mug leapt off a shelf and exploded across the deck. Lights flickered as alarm indicators jumped, their brief flashes painting every face in sharp strokes of red. "Report," Briggs barked from control. Through the intercom, Hayes answered, "Impact forward, checking boards now." In sonar, the trace erupted in chaotic noise, a burst of static and distortion so close it sounded like the ocean itself had screamed. The buoy's channel spiked, then stuttered. Cable tension rising, Ortega snapped. "Way too high." Stevens called from engineering that the reactor remained steady, no scram, no abnormal readings, but his voice carried a tremor he couldn't hide. The strain alarm shrieked for 2 full seconds before abruptly dropping off as the cable went slack. "We lost the buoy," Hart whispered. "No signal returning." Briggs ordered retrieval. It felt like hours before the torpedo gang finally hauled the ruined capsule into the forward compartment, though the clock insisted it had been only minutes. I went with Ortega and Hart to inspect it, dread already curdling in my stomach. The sight of the buoy made that dread solid. The casing was mashed inward in twisted arcs, not crushed by pressure, but grabbed, squeezed by something with uneven force. The metal was torn along spirals, edges jagged like shredded tin. Hart ran her gloved fingers along one gouge, lips pressed thin. "Not rock," she said. "Rock leaves scratches, not this." In the torn seams of the buoy, pale gelatinous tissue clung like smeared jelly. Strings of semi-transparent cartilage hung in sticky strands, glistening beneath the compartment lights. The smell was faint but unmistakably organic, a wet, sour odor that did not belong anywhere near submarine steel. Ortega plucked a firmer fragment with tweezers and dropped it into a sample jar. Even through the glass, you could see the fibrous structure. Cartilage, he said flatly. Nobody argued. A's, straining for a less horrific explanation, asked whether corrosion or pressure shear could cause such damage. Hart didn't bother hiding her irritation. This is fresh. Something alive did this. Something with jaws or plates strong enough to bite metal. Brink stood stiffly with his arms crossed, expression unreadable. Log it, he said. Mark the boy unrecoverable. We continued the test schedule. Hart stared at him, disbelief giving way to anger. The breeze doesn't bite, she said quietly. Briggs met her eyes without blinking. We are not chasing stories. We finish our mission. She didn't argue further, but the look she gave the crushed boy said everything. Word spread across the boat almost instantly. Steele is terrible at keeping secrets. By lunchtime, every sailor aboard had heard some version of the story, some calling it a deep-sea predator, others whispering about creatures older than the continents, and a few muttering about thresher ghosts returning to drag us down. Ortega shut down the worst of the rumors when he heard them, ordered the mess to keep professional discipline, but I noticed he sat a little closer to the sonar stacks that next watch, ears sharp, hands restless on the controls. Meanwhile, Hart spent hours cutting cartilage samples, her small lab corner lit by a single lamp that carved shadows across her face. I passed her once and caught her murmuring, "It was alive when it struck. It knew what it was doing." She wasn't talking about the fragments. She meant the creature. When the officers finally met in the wardroom to discuss her findings, the tension was as thick as recycled air. Hart laid out her graphs and samples, showing density levels far beyond normal sharks, cartilage mineralization patterns that hinted at adaptation to crushing depths, and electroreceptive features similar to goblin sharks, but monstrously scaled. Haynes tried to wrap it in logic. Unknown variant? Unknown, she confirmed, but not random. And not harmless. Before they could decide how to adjust course, Miller rushed in with a fresh VLF message. Command's orders were painfully clear. Continue all acoustic trials to completion. Full test depth profile. Maximum data collection. They didn't care about the dented buoy or the cartilage. They cared about proving the fleet's new generation of subs could survive where Thresher hadn't. Briggs folded the message, jaw twitching. We stay on mission, he announced. We treat everything as environmental until proven otherwise. Maintain discipline. That single word, discipline, was a thin shield against a rising sense of doom. And as we took the gray veil deeper into the Atlantic, past the depth where the buoy had been torn apart, the ocean pressed in around us like a warning we refused to hear. The order to continue deeper felt like a sentence we all silently understood, but none of us dared to oppose Briggs as he stood in control, hands clasped behind his back, voice steady while the boat angled down toward test depth. The gauge slid past 900,000, then 1,000, then 1,100 feet, each number adding a new tension to the air, as steel moaned around us like something alive. At 1,300 feet, just below the limit set after Thresher, Briggs ordered us to hold depth, and the boat settled uneasily, hull creaking in long, aching notes while we monitored the ridge off our bow. For a short while, the ocean stayed quiet, too quiet, until faint drifting shapes began appearing on sonar. Blurry returns moving beneath us, then to our flanks. 3, 4, then 5 of them. Pacing the submarine at low speed, like shadows keeping formation. Classification, Hayes asked, and Ortega could only answer with, no screws, no cavitation, no machinery, unknown biological. Each time we adjusted course, the shapes drifted after us, matching our new heading a moment later, like a slow, deliberate pursuit. Hart leaned over the display, pointing out mass indicators far beyond normal sharks and suggesting multiple large bodies moving in loose formation. Before we could absorb that, a scraping vibration shuddered along the forward hull, followed by a quick jolt, as though something brushed or nudged the steel deliberately. Engineering reported no breaches, but Stevens began seeing small magnetic fluctuations in the reactor field that lined up disturbingly well with moments when the contacts drifted closer. Soon after, a faint clicking pattern returned in sonar, this time much clearer, and matched perfectly with the rhythm of the reactor's pulse, as if the creatures were echoing or sensing our electrical heartbeat. Crew sleep dissolved. No one wanted to rack out with those knocks whispering through the hull. Briggs ordered a silent running drill to get a clean listen on whatever surrounded us. With speed lowered and non-essential equipment shut down, the boat fell into a breathless hush. Then the knocks began. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps again, moving around our hull like a coded message from something circling in the black. Hart, Ortega, Hayes, and I set up a hull inspection camera rig in the forward compartment, pushing a small wired camera outside the sub to capture footage. After developing the film, the room fell silent as a single frame revealed itself, the bow dome looming in the foreground, and inches from it, a pale, fleshy snout ending in jawlines full of crooked teeth, a half-open mouth layered with jagged edges. And above the maw, a wide, lidless eye fixed on our hull. Goblin shark, Hart breathed, though she admitted it was impossibly large for any known species. Chipped tooth marks and scraped skin patterns on the steel showed it had already contacted us. Before anyone could decide what to do next, a sudden slam hammered midship so violently the entire vessel rang like struck metal. Lights flickered, alarms sputtered, panels buzzed. The hit was no glancing blow. Something massive had charged the gray veil. A fuse panel blew above navigation, sending fragments across the compartment and slashing Seaman's neck. Kramer rushed in, packing the wound, but the young sailor bled out before they could move him. His death turned the earlier unease into something sharper and colder. In the wardroom, Hayes demanded they abort the dive and ascend, calling the creatures hostile and unpredictable. Hart argued that understanding their attraction might help avoid future contact. Briggs, visibly strained but immovable, insisted the hull was still sound, the reactor steady, and command expected them to finish the profile. Back in sonar, the contacts multiplied into thick, murky shapes circling the sub, their scraping louder, their bumps heavier. External microphones captured long, rough drags along the steel, each vibration traveling through our bones. Then control reported minor flooding in the forward ballast tank, a small pipe torn apart from the outside, metal bent inward in a way no internal failure could explain. They isolated and drained it, but trim values didn't align afterward. The bow grew heavier, the boat adopting a slight nose-down angle no one could fully correct. Soon the depth gauge began drifting downward on its own. 1,310, 1,320, 1,330. Despite efforts to compensate, the creatures outside kept pace, sometimes riding alongside, sometimes drifting beneath like sharks shadowing a wounded animal. Briggs broadcast calm instructions to maintain stations, but alarms triggered as we passed 1,400 feet. Hull pops and groans deepened into unsettling resonant booms. Stevens requested reducing reactor output to minimize risk under the strain, and Briggs approved, dimming lights and cutting all non-essential power. The submarine descended into a red-lit, shadow-filled world. With processing power limited, sonar visibility worsened, and the creature's returns blurred into the noise, drawing in even closer. Hart began correlating their proximity with electrical spikes across multiple systems, arguing that our power signature acted like a beacon. Some men swore they heard wet sliding noises along the hull. Others heard faint tapping that mimicked breathing or movement. Tension boiled over. 2 sailors nearly fought in the mess before Hayes physically intervened. The boat kept sinking. 1,450, 1,500, 1,550 feet, each new depth pushing us further beyond a safety limit set after Thresher. Each groan of steel a reminder of how thin the line was between existence and collapse. The ocean felt like it was squeezing us deliberately, and the creatures outside, whatever they truly were, seemed content to watch. Whether they were waiting, learning, or preparing, no one knew. But every man aboard understood the same unspoken truth. The gray veil was no longer simply exploring the ridge. We had drifted into something's territory, and it had no intention of letting us go. The hit that followed came without warning. No buildup, no hint, just a violent, skull-rattling impact that slammed into the hull so fiercely the entire submarine lurched. Lights flickered, and alarms half-screamed before dying into static. A fuse panel burst above navigation, blowing its cover across the compartment and slicing a seaman's neck open in a spray of blood so sudden no one reacted in time. He collapsed without a sound, drowning in his own pulse before Kramer could even clamp the wound. The scraping outside intensified, long serrated drags along the steel as if massive bodies were circling and testing us, gauging the weaknesses of the gray veil by feel alone. Minor surge in reactor output, Stevens called from engineering, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. The diving officer struggled with his gauges, depth jittering, trimming consistent, the boat pitching ever so slightly forward as if something heavy pressed against her bow or dragged along her underside. When the dead seaman was carried away, a silence heavier than grief settled over control. Everyone felt it, the knowledge that we'd crossed from fear into open danger. Briggs, Hayes, and Hart locked themselves in a tense wardroom argument, Hayes demanding they abort the dive and ascend before the hull took irreversible damage. Briggs insisting the structural readings remained within safe margins, and command expected a completed profile, and Hart arguing they needed more data to understand the creature's behavior before making any move. Briggs won by stubborn resolve alone, though no one looked convinced. Back on watch, the sonar picture worsened, large indistinct shapes circling tight, sometimes crossing beneath our keel, sometimes drifting along the flanks, each pass accompanied by dull thuds and abrasive scrapes that made teeth ache. Then control reported minor flooding in the forward ballast compartment. Damage control rushed forward, boots pounding metal, opening panels to find a small pipe torn, not sheared, not cracked, torn, edges bent inward as if something outside had shoved or twisted the hull plate just enough to rupture the line. They isolated the leak, pumped the compartment dry, but trim remained off. The bow felt heavier, nose tipped down in a way no internal adjustment corrected. That imbalance worsened until the depth gauge began to creep. 1,300 feet, 1,310, 1,320, and sinking, despite efforts to compensate. Trim not responding, the diving officer whispered, fear leaking through his professional tone. The creature's returns closed in tighter, 3, 4, maybe more, slow-moving but constant, lingering beneath us as if nudging the submarine toward deeper water. The hull protested in deep metallic groans, each pop reverberating in the deck plates. Briggs tried maintaining calm across the intercom, announcing ballast issues and reassuring the crew damage control had it in hand. But alarms triggered again as the gauge passed 1,400 feet, then 1,450. Stevens called for reducing reactor output, worried stress fluctuations might trip systems we could not afford to lose, and Briggs agreed, plunging the boat into a dim red glow as non-essential systems went offline. The hull became a chamber of echoes, knocks tapping from different bearings, the whisper of something sliding along steel, and every so often a heavy bump, the kind of full-body hit you felt in your teeth and knees. Sonar degraded under limited power, the contacts blending into our own noise, but their presence was unmistakable. Hart charted the tiny electrical spikes that flared each time the creatures approached, insisting they were reacting to or homing in on our field signatures. Sleep became impossible. Men lay in their racks staring at the overhead, hearing phantom taps and imagining the ocean outside crawling with bodies brushing the hull. Tension finally snapped when two sailors in the mess nearly came to blows over a muttered comment about survival odds. Hayes had to physically drag them apart, ordering discipline through clenched teeth. Still the boat kept sinking. 1,500, 1,520, 1,540. Each foot a quiet betrayal of the systems meant to keep us alive. The hull shook again, not from impact but from pressure alone, groaning in long tortured notes that made even hardened veterans pale. Every man aboard understood the truth now. We weren't sinking because of mechanical failure alone. Something outside was pushing, nudging, disturbing Trim, working us deeper into its realm with a patience so deliberate it felt almost intelligent. And yet, through all of it, we kept moving downward, deeper than any of us had ever imagined surviving, wrapped in darkness thick as oil, while unseen bodies slid along our hull like hands feeling their way toward a final, inevitable break. The tension aboard the Gray Veil finally cracked as we drifted past depths no submarine had any business reaching. the hull screaming in long metallic wails that felt like the ocean trying to crush us in its fist. And even the toughest men aboard could no longer pretend we weren't in mortal danger. Fights nearly broke out in the mess, two sailors lunging at each other over some whispered remark about odds of survival, until Hayes yanked them apart, ordering discipline through clenched teeth while the deck trembled under our boots. Briggs walked the boat more often now, checking every compartment, speaking to chiefs in hushed tones, face drawn tight in the dim red emergency lighting that made all of us look ghostly. When the depth gauge rolled past 1,600 feet and the hull let out a shriek that seemed to vibrate through our ribs, the entire sub lurched downward and slammed into something solid, the slope of the seafloor, hitting bow first, then rocking as the rest of the hull settled in a bone-deep thump that flung tools, mugs, and bodies across compartments. Sensors fuzzed out for a moment before stabilizing enough to tell us we were seated on a steep incline, nose angled downward, reactor at minimal output, hull integrity mostly green but showing more warnings than anyone liked. Sonar reported the creatures had backed off slightly during the impact, but still lingered nearby, slow-moving shadows circling just out of clear range. Briggs ordered the boat into maximum quiet, shutting down everything we didn't need, letting us sit in a suffocating stillness broken only by the soft churn of life support and a slow, deliberate knots echoing along our hull, one near the bow, one drifting along the keel, another tapping the stern in a pattern that felt sickeningly patient. Hart sat with us in sonar, listening with eyes wide and unfocused, whispering that they were either curious or waiting for something, neither option comforting. We couldn't stay on the slope forever. Everyone knew the longer we sat pinned in the dark, the more stress built along the hull, and the higher the chance some vital system would fail beyond repair. Briggs called a meeting in the wardroom with the senior crew, Hayes, Hart, Ortega, Stevens, and insisted we had to get off the slope and ascend while we still had structural integrity and reactor function. He laid out the only plan available: blow as much water from the ballast tanks as we could, throttle the reactor back up, use thrust to slide off the incline and force the sub upward. The risks were obvious. Damaged ballast tanks might blow unevenly, the reactor might spike, the creatures might react violently to the sudden noise and field changes, but the alternative was staying trapped until pressure or biology finished us. Stevens warned he'd need to reroute coolant manually if lines didn't cooperate. Hart warned the creatures would swarm us the moment we flared bright acoustically and electromagnetically. They're already around us, Hayes said. Better to move than die here. Everyone agreed because there was no other choice. The boat was rigged for the emergency ascent, control dimmed even further, only the critical instruments glowing red. Men whispered instead of speaking, sweat and fear mingled with the metallic air as stations braced. In sonar, Ortega tracked the creatures pressed close against the hull, their returns hugging our outline like living shadows. Hart listened too, gripping her headset. Briggs stood at the periscope stand like a man preparing for execution but determined to walk to the gallows himself. On my mark, he said over the circuit. Stand by to blow mean ballast. Reactor, prepare to increase output. Stevens confirmed readiness. The countdown began. 10 seconds, 9, 8. No one moved except the men at switches and valves. 3, 2, 1, blow. Air thundered through the tanks, reverberating through the decks as the reactor surged and the screw dug into the deep. At first, nothing happened. We stayed pinned to the slope, the ocean's grip refusing to release us, until a grinding vibration rolled under the keel and the bow lifted by agonizing inches. Then, painfully, the gray veil slid free and began to rise. For one heartbeat, we felt hope. Then the creatures attacked. Sonar lit up with massive forms peeling from the bottom and charging upward. One slammed the bow dome, ringing the forward section like a bell. Another tore along midship in a long, vibrating scrape, leaving gouges we could feel through the deck plates. A third rammed the stern planes, making the diving officer fight the reels. Controls stiffened. The hull quivered under their assault as we clawed upward, engines screaming, ballast tanks vibrating like drums, and everyone aboard understanding we had only one chance to break the surface before the deep claimed us for good. Inside the gray veil, the chaos reached a breaking point as the creatures' assaults intensified, each impact rattling loose fittings, popping gauges from their mounts. and showering sparks from trembling panels, while red lights swung wildly from the overhead like lanterns in a storm. Stevens' voice cut through the noise. Reactor fluxing. Coolant pressure dropping, a sentence that froze every man in place, because losing coolant meant one step from meltdown, or a hard scram that would leave us dead in the water with monsters battering our hull. Before Briggs or Hayes could respond, Hayes sprinted aft with Stevens' assistant, pushing through panicked crew to reach the manual valve stack, buried in the blistering heat of the reactor compartment. Later they told me how Hayes climbed onto the twisting pipes, gripped a stubborn valve wheel with both hands while heat peeled skin from his palms, and forced it open centimeter by centimeter until the coolant reroute caught, pressure stabilized, and Stevens shouted that the reactor was holding, saving all of us from an instant death we never would have seen coming. In control, Briggs watched the depth numbers crawl upward at agonizing speed, still rising, but too slowly, each creature's hit robbing us of momentum. Additional blow, he ordered. Everything we've got. More compressed air thundered through the tanks, though some responded sluggishly due to earlier damage. The bow lifted steeper, the deck tilted under our feet, and Somar showed some of the huge shapes falling away as pressure changes tore at them, while two stubborn ones stayed with us, one beneath the bow, one scraping along the port side. Every hit reverberated through bone and steel. Hart, staring at her scope, whispered, "They can't handle the pressure shift. They're fighting to stop us, or to keep us down." Depth gauges rolled upward, 1,600, 1,500, 1,400 feet, while the hull groaned in tortured protest. One creature's return flickered, slowing, then drifting downward lifelessly as we hauled ourselves higher. The second kept ramming the bow, each strike weaker but desperate, until around 1,000 feet when its signature stuttered and finally slid away into the abyss. With only the crushing darkness above us, we continued rising, the water brightening by imperceptible shades on the instruments. At 500 feet, external cameras caught faint gray light shimmering beyond the hull. At 200 feet, Briggs eased the blow to avoid rocketing out of the ocean like a breaching whale. We slowed to a controlled descent and paused at 50 feet to listen for surface traffic. Hearing none, Briggs gave the order, "Surface." Ballast shifted, and moments later, we punched through the Atlantic with a heavy roll, waves bursting against the sail as the submarine inhaled its first breath of open air. Every man aboard felt the collective shudder of relief, until something large dragged slowly along the keel, one last apathetic scrape before fading into nothing. We all froze, listening for a follow-up, but the ocean above us held only wind and waves. With one dead, several injured, hull damage, and a shaken reactor crew, we radioed an emergency signal, a coded burst announcing casualty, potential structural damage, and the need for escort. When we vented the reactor compartment earlier to purge residual odor and smoke, the remaining haze rose into the frigid winter air, drifting above us like ghostly steam. A destroyer answered our distress call and closed in from the west, gray and silent, unaware of what had clawed along our steel hours before. She took escort position, ready to assist if our reactor faltered, and we made the journey back riding just below the surface, unwilling to expose the weakened hull to the violence of open waves, but too shaken to submerge fully. In that shallow transit, the ocean sounded normal again. No knocks, no scraping, no clicks, just the steady wash of our escort screws. Once in dry dock, teams inspected every inch of the Greyville's belly. I stood on the dock staring at the gouges running along the bow and midship. Long, shallow curved scars, some crossing each other in patterns that twisted my stomach. Several impressions looked like teeth, massive and uneven. Other scratches were smooth, as though rubbery flesh had pressed and slid against the steel. Naval intelligence arrived quickly, plainclothesmen and officers in crisp uniforms, collecting everything: the cartilage samples, Hart's lab notes, Ortega's tapes, even my scratch logs. They confiscated the film still that had captured the creature's pale snout and lidless eye. During debrief, admirals and civilians peppered us with questions, trying to coax a mechanical or geological explanation from events that clearly had none. Hart stated plainly that rock does not leave cartilage. Ortega insisted he knew the sound of steel dragged by flesh, not machinery. The final written report watered everything down into a clinical phrase: unidentified biological interference during deep test operations, hull contact from large marine fauna, reactor and safety systems resilient. They underlined that last part, eager to prove that after Thresher, their new systems had survived a real-world stressor. Briggs resigned within a year, officially for health reasons, but before he left, I caught him standing under the Thresher plaque, whispering, "We almost joined them." Hayes kept serving but reportedly walked passageways at night on later boats, listening for knocks that weren't there. Hart returned to Woods Hole, her draft paper classified before she could finish, relegated to public research on whales. I completed my tour, rowed other boats, and left the Navy with years between me and that dive. Yet I still hear those knocks sometimes, faint and patient, tapping in the dark, like something out there remembers the gray veil and wonders why we escaped. And that, my friends, was the Goblin shark incident of '65, the dive that should have ended in silence but somehow clawed its way back to daylight. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person I want on this channel. The ones who don't scare easy, who don't look away when the deep starts knocking. So hit like, smash that subscribe button, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know, and it keeps this channel alive. This is Captain Rebel, signing off. Stay sharp, stay curious, and whatever you do, don't ignore the sounds coming from below.